Welcome back, everybody. Next up, we wanted to get reaction to a number of issues in the news from both sides of the aisle. And to do that today, we're joined by Peter Sullivan. He's a current alderman here in Manchester. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And also former congressional candidate Grant Bosse. He also works for the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy. Thanks for coming in today.
Great to be back.
If you could keep each of your responses to 30 timed seconds, I would appreciate it. First up, Congressman Joe Wilson said he was sorry for yelling "you lie" at the president. The House voted to censure him this week. Paul Hodes, by the way, voted no on this. Carol Shea Porter voting present on this vote. The question is, did Joe Wilson deserve all of this? And Peter Sullivan, I pose that question to you.
Well, I think Joe Wilson deserves our criticism. He deserves our harshest criticism for what he did. But does it rise to the level of something that deserves censure by the full House? I really don't think so. I think censure is something that should be reserved for violations of the public trust, for gross misconduct, not for a guy that basically acted like a jerk. And that's what Joe Wilson did. He was acting like a frat boy on a Friday night. And it's not something that rose to the level of censure.
Okay.
I think Paul Hodes had the right idea by
voting no on that.
By voting no, moving on.
Gotcha. Grant Bosse, what do you say?
Yeah, he acted like a jerk. He said he was wrong. He apologized. The president accepted it. And then Congress decided to have a political stunt. If acting like a jerk disqualified you from Congress, we wouldn't have anybody on the ballot. Good for Paul Hodes for voting against this complete waste of oxygen, and Carol Shea Porter's vote was just a cop-out.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks, about the ballot thing. Anyway, this week, Manchester held its city primary, and we're going to actually skip that question. This week, the governor issued a deadline to wrap up contract negotiations with the state employees union. 500 state employees could be laid off if no agreement is reached. And there's no word, or there is word, I should say, that an agreement may be reached at this point. Will the two sides come together on this issue, or will it continue to drag on? And Grant, I'll start with you.
Yes, it will. It will drag on, and then the two sides will come to an agreement, and they'll likely avoid any sort of major layoffs. We'll get furloughs, we'll get unpaid days off, we'll have days where the DMV will shut down on a weekday. That sort of thing will happen, but I don't think this governor has any stomach for layoffs.
Okay. And Peter, I'll toss it over to you. What are your thoughts about this, the negotiations going on right now?
Well, I have to be careful what I say because my wife is a state employee, and I could end up sleeping on the sofa tonight if I say the wrong thing. But my sense is that the two sides really aren't that far apart. There's some issues where there are differences. The bumping rights seem to be a point of contention, but I don't think these are issues that are going to prevent an agreement from coming together fairly quickly at this point. I think everybody understands the need to avoid layoffs if at all possible.
Yep.
And I think we're going to move in that direction, and I think the governor and the union leadership should be able to come to an agreement very quickly.
And it looks like that could happen. We'll see. We'll stay tuned for that one. Next up, health care reform. Senator Max Baucus introduced a health care reform plan this week with no public option in it, instead offering health insurance cooperatives. There was a lackluster reaction to this proposal. Should the public option in this bill be dropped as a compromise? And Peter, I'll toss it over to you.
Well, no, personally, I don't think it should be. I think the public option is a key component of the president's plan. I think it's a smart way of trying to harness some market forces and harness competition as a way to drive down the cost of insurance to uninsured families that will have to buy into whatever program moves forward. Are cooperatives something that are worth looking at? Yeah, I suppose they are, but I think they're the less desirable alternative on a number of levels. I do think there's room for compromise in some other issues, and I think the president has made that clear. Tort reform being one of them. I think that's something that could be a point of agreement.
All right. And Grant, what are your thoughts about health care reform?
I don't think the Baucus bill is going anywhere. It's too expensive, $850 billion. It doesn't even go into effect for a few years. Co-ops are a government option by another name, and the individual mandates for health insurance, they tried it in Massachusetts, and now they've got the highest insurance premiums in the nation. Bad idea.
Oh, okay. Let's move on. Maybe you've seen those road signs touting highway stimulus projects. This week, Senator Gregg tried to pass a bill stopping this, saying it could save the government millions of dollars. Do we need these road signs out there? And Grant, I'll start with you.
No, we don't need the signs. And it's proof that this stimulus, a huge waste of money, was more about Congress taking credit for bringing pork back to their districts than it was actually putting people back to work. We're not going to repave our way back to prosperity, and good for Senator Gregg and Senator Shaheen, who voted for this, for trying to get those signs off the highways.
Peter, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I disagree with Grant on the value of the stimulus. I think there's an economic case to be made there. However, I do agree with Senator Shaheen and Senator Gregg that the signs really aren't necessary. However, I think Judd Gregg probably isn't the best guy in the world to bring that message to the floor. We have a bridge just a block from here named after him. Maybe we should go and change the plaque on that bridge if Judd Gregg is serious about keeping politics out of public works.
All right, moving on right now. 2 workers for the group ACORN caught on tape allegedly trying to help people cheat the housing system. This group has a number of Democratic ties. Now both houses of Congress saying to cut funding for ACORN. What kind of political fallout will there be from all of this? And Peter, I'll start with you.
I don't think there will be any. ACORN is a very small group in the grand scheme of things, and frankly, they're not a very effective group. I had some experience watching them in action down in Little Rock a number of years ago. They're really not that effective. They're not a major player within Democratic politics or within community organizing and community development circles around the country. And the president's connection with them is very, very tenuous, almost non-existent. So I think any political fallout will be minimal to non-existent.
So not much fallout. Grant, would you agree with that?
This is a huge Democratic group. If the mafia started registering voters, it would be ACORN. And if there's no ties to the Democratic Party, why did this administration try to funnel them nearly $4 billion in stimulus money, tried to put them in charge of the census next year? This is a criminal racket masquerading as a community service organization, and it's about time we got them off the federal dole.
All right, obviously differing opinions there. Turning now to the local Senate race. A new poll shows Republican Kelly Ayotte with a lead over Democrat Paul Hodes. The Rasmussen poll right here, the numbers 46% for Ayotte, 38% for Hodes. Does this really mean anything this early into this race? And Grant, I will start with you.
It means not a lot of people, especially in the 1st District, know Paul Hodes yet. Kelly Ayotte has a name recognition lead. I think she'd be a strong candidate. The other Republicans considering it. Whoever comes out of that primary will be a very strong challenger to Paul Hodes, who looks like he's going to get a free ride on the Democratic side. Open Senate seats in competitive years don't come open all that often. It's going to be an interesting year.
Peter, what are your thoughts about the numbers you just saw?
Well, what does it mean? I think it means we have a long way to go before this election. Paul Hodes is in a good position. He's developed a reputation as a thoughtful, consensus-building congressman. I think he's going to be an extremely strong candidate. And Kelly Ayotte's going to have her hands full with Ovid Lamontagne and potentially Sean Mahoney.
Let's move on to one last question here in the segment. In the last election cycle, we heard a lot of candidates who wanted to work in a bipartisan way to fix the problems in our state and the country. And it seems the Dems and the Republicans seem as split as they ever were. What happened here? And I'll toss it over to you, Peter.
You know, I wish I knew. When I was in the legislature, I spent 5 years there, I was always ready and willing to work with folks from the Republican Party, from different ideological backgrounds. Something happened in Washington. I don't know if it's in the water in the Potomac River or what, but there seems to be a decline in civility. It's unfortunate because you don't see that interaction, that open discussion of ideas that we've had in years past. The days when you could have had Ted Kennedy and a Dick Lugar coming together, that seems to be fading. And I think we're a lesser country because of that.
All right, Grant, what are your thoughts about bipartisanship?
Oh, we've got plenty of bipartisanship in Washington. We had a bipartisan agreement to blow up the debt and the deficit. We had bipartisan agreement to bail out the banks, bipartisan agreement to ignore the borders. And we're finally having a real discussion on health care over whether government should be bigger or smaller. It's about time.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're hearing from Grant Bosse and Peter Sullivan.
The good news continues during Hyundai's Extra Extra sales event.